Did you finish moving? With his typical condescending tone, my husband asked me that. I coldly responded without meeting his gaze. I'm leaving. From that point on, I didn't utter a word and started preparing to leave the house. I'd reached my limit with the daily berating from my husband and mother-in-law. It felt like something within me shattered. Deep down, I just knew I couldn't deal with my husband or mother-in-law anymore. The moment my husband told me to leave, I oddly felt calm. Since then, I've prioritized myself and ignored both my husband and mother-in-law. The day after I truly left, I received several frantic calls from my mother-in-law. Hello? Who's this? My feigned ignorance left my mother-in-law dumbfounded. From that point on, the nefarious actions of my husband and mother-in-law were exposed, and their lives spiraled into chaos. My name is Catherine. I work part-time at a nearby deli. I married Bob when I was 25 and gave birth to our son, Charlie, at 28. Now, as we celebrate our 25th wedding anniversary, we're both 50. Just recently, Charlie graduated from college and began his life as a working adult. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. These 25 years weren't just full of joy, there were hardships and memories from the past that occasionally haunted me. Looking back, I don't think Bob and I were ever that great of a couple. We never thought about divorce, but we did have our fair share of big arguments stemming from little things. We'd clash and then not talk for a while. But once Charlie was born, those moments became less frequent. Bob had always wanted a boy, so Charlie was like a dream come true. However, I personally felt that I didn't want any more children and decided to focus on raising Charlie properly. For Bob, having one male heir seemed to be enough, so there was no issue there. Of course, my relationship with Charlie wasn't always smooth. He went through his rebellious phase like most kids, and we had disagreements about his future. But Charlie was always straightforward. He was clear about what he wanted and what he needed to do, and he never hesitated to share his opinions with us. I felt that Charlie should do whatever he wanted, but Bob seemed to have a different idea. Listen up, a man's worth is in his education. I'll never approve if you just finish high school. And if you go to college, it better be a top one, or I ain't paying. With that, Bob tried to force Charlie onto a path he laid out. But Charlie wasn't one to stay quiet. In the end, he clashed with Bob and chose a college with the program he wanted. Despite these issues, Charlie successfully graduated, and that's something to be thankful for. We're both still 50 and looking forward to our second life. Lately, we hadn't been fighting much, and I thought maybe we could have a peaceful time in our later years. But those faint hopes were soon shattered. A visit from my mother-in-law dramatically changed my life. One day, after work, I returned home and strangely found a pair of women's shoes at the entrance. Wondering if we had a visitor, I headed to the living room to find my mother-in-law there. When she realized I was home, she let out an exaggerated sigh. Then Bob, with a lazy tone, said, "Mom wants to live with us. She says she's lonely living alone. She's already given up her apartment, so it seems like the only option is for her to stay with us." Apparently, after the recent passing of my father-in-law, she felt lonely and decided to rely on her son, Bob. While I understood her feelings, I wasn't thrilled about the sudden decision to move in. To be honest, I've always had difficulty dealing with my mother-in-law. Until now, it was just Bob, Charlie, and me living together, but there was a time when we briefly lived with my in-laws. It was right after we got married. Back then, my mother-in-law was adamantly against Bob, her son, moving out after our marriage. She said it'd be best if we all lived together, and she pushed the issue rather aggressively. Although I hesitated, I agreed to live with them, but it quickly became unbearable. She was way too intrusive. Every day she'd make comments, asking when we'd have kids or criticizing my cooking. Maybe that's why I ended up having fertility issues. Bob realized the situation wasn't good and, with my father-in-law's help, persuaded her to let us move out. But it seemed like she held a grudge against me ever since. After that, we'd visit their place during the holidays, but we generally avoided them the rest of the year. Just when I thought we had regained our peace, the idea of living together again honestly seemed unthinkable. As I was trying to process everything, Bob sighed and said, "Don't be so obvious with your feelings, it's rude to Mom. Anyway, I figured you'd object, so it seemed like a waste of time discussing it. My siblings are busy with their own kids, so Mom has no one to rely on but me. Understand that." He sounded quite irritated. Since she had already given up her place, there was no turning her away. Exhausted, I tried to sit on the couch, but she stopped me. "What do you think you're doing? We were waiting for you. Now, go make dinner." She wouldn't even let me rest and insisted I cook. As expected, she complained about the meal. Thinking this would be my life day in and day out gave me a headache. Later on, Bob and my mother-in-law said they had something to discuss. Apparently, they wanted to do some renovations. The house, being quite old, did need some repairs here and there. We had taken care of those minor issues, but what she particularly didn't like were the plumbing areas. She said the bathroom and toilet looked old and dingy and needed a makeover. However, she had no intention of using the kitchen, so she said it was fine the way it was. Our mortgage was set up to finish when we turned 60, so we still have about 10 years left on it. Even so, I wasn't keen on the idea of renovating, but something happened a few days later. Unbelievably, while I was at work, she took it upon herself to get an estimate and even signed a contract with a contractor. To make matters worse, Bob withdrew a large chunk from our retirement savings without my knowledge, costing us thousands of dollars. When I confronted Bob, he lost his temper. "This house is in my name, I can do whatever I want. Why's someone like you, with a measly part-time job, always butting in?" I was speechless. He didn't seem to understand the sacrifices I made, giving up my career for our family. Holding back tears was tough. It's been about 6 months since we started living with my self-centered mother-in-law. At first, she seemed to have moved in because of loneliness, but as time went on, I started suspecting other motives. She seemed worried about her own care in her old age and finances. Turns out, she almost had no inheritance from my late father-in-law and had no savings of her own. She never took out any life insurance, and even then, her hobby was playing slot machines, which just baffled me. Currently, she's unemployed and receives a pension. I knew my father-in-law had been contributing to a pension for years, and she should be getting a decent amount from that, but she always claimed to be broke. The reason? Every time she receives her pension, she blows it all on slot machines the same day. So she always tried to make me pay for everything she needed. We're not exactly wealthy, and because of her, we've been forced to cut back on a lot of our expenses. And yet, she'd constantly make lavish requests without contributing a dime. She'd often say she wanted to eat out or wanted expensive cosmetics to stay looking young. Since Bob didn't like spending money on anything other than himself, my mother-in-law would always come to me asking for cash. Initially, I'd help her out, buying her essentials and occasionally giving her some money. But it added up over time. When I realized how much I'd given her, I put my foot down and refused to give her any more. That seemed to have caused her a lot of stress. She continued with her gambling habit and had insatiable desires, so she plotted to get money out of me. To my shock, she began sneakily stealing small amounts from my wallet, hoping I wouldn't notice. One day, I realized some cash was missing, and the next day, even more was gone. I confronted her since she was the obvious suspect, but she played dumb. From that day on, her harassment escalated. Apparently, she'd been bad-mouthing me to Bob, painting me as the villain. After hearing from his mother, my husband started looking at me with a disdainful glare. It was as if he was looking at something disgusting, and he said, "How can you accuse Mom without any proof? This is like reverse bullying of the mother-in-law. I never thought you'd be this twisted." From that day on, both Bob and his mother started treating me not as a family member, but more like a maid. Bob wouldn't even call me by my name anymore. One time, while I was having an argument with Bob, his mother interrupted and said, "You live off my son's salary and you're just a part-timer. You think you can talk back? This is karma. You better reflect on yourself. All I had done was mention the messy way he left his suit around, but they harped on it like I'd committed a major crime. Their harassment escalated day by day, slowly chipping away at my mental well-being. I reached my breaking point, and one morning, right after my mother-in-law left for her daily walk, I mustered up the courage to tell Bob. I couldn't live with his mother anymore. I never expected it would trigger him so badly. His face turned beet red, and he shouted louder than I'd ever heard before. "She's my mother! And you treat her like this? There are plenty of women who could replace you. Get out of this house and never show your face to me again." Shocked, I felt something inside me shatter. Be it my rationality or my patience. My instincts screamed at me that I couldn't deal with Bob or his mother anymore. With a calm voice, I acknowledged his words, quickly got ready, and left for work. Since then, I prioritized myself, ignoring both Bob and his mother. About a week after our fight, Bob, still looking down on me, asked, "Have you moved out yet?" His mother had asked the same, but I didn't make eye contact with either of them and simply responded, "I'm leaving." I didn't utter another word after that, grabbed my things, and left the house we had lived in for years. The very next day, as expected, my mother-in-law bombarded me with incessant calls. She called so often, it felt borderline insane. But it was too bothersome to pick up, so I ignored her. But when she kept on, to the point where I couldn't even look at my phone, I blocked her. Then, a call came from Bob's phone. I thought about ignoring it, but figured I'd have to face the issue eventually. When I answered, it wasn't Bob, but his mother. "Why are you ignoring me? I've been calling so much, and you're just so rude." Trying to suppress my laughter, I responded, "Sorry, who's this?" "This number belongs to my husband, Bob, but some strange woman's calling. I better hang up." I did hang up, emphasizing my point. The phone rang again, and this time, it was Bob on the other end. "You think you can mess with me?" Right off the bat, he was shouting at me. Infuriated, I fired back. "Seems like you're the one doing the messing." I could hear Bob catch his breath at my yelling. I'm usually calm and not one to get angry, so my sudden outburst must have caught him off guard. Intimidated by my fury, Bob sounded flustered. I had a hunch about what he and his mother were getting at. Probably something like, "We didn't really mean for you to leave. Come back. It's gonna be tough without you around, especially as a free housekeeper." From his mother's perspective, she'd be at a loss without her money tree, me. But I'd reached my breaking point living with his mother. The stress and humiliation were too much, and I was set on leaving. Bob's words were just the straw that broke the camel's back. "I have no intention of ever returning to that house. I just can't see myself living with you or your mother any longer. So, let's get a divorce," I declared. After that, I could hear Bob and his mother arguing in the background. Their muffled conversation seemed to revolve around topics like, "There's no way she can really leave with her part-time income," and "Divorcing at our age is embarrassing." There was no more point in talking to them, it'd just be a waste of time. As Charlie always said, time is money. "Let's discuss the terms of the divorce. Until we finalize it, I won't be seeing you. I'm gonna get a lawyer, so be prepared on your end," I firmly stated. As I was about to hang up, Bob pleaded in a desperate tone. "Wait, Catherine! Please!" Wondering what he wanted now, I listened. "I was wrong, I'm sorry. I can't handle things without you. Please come back." After offering a half-hearted apology, he made that ridiculous request. It was clear he'd just revert to his condescending ways if I returned. It was plain as day. "I'm not your personal maid. If you need housework done, hire a maid online. If you can spend thousands of dollars on renovations, hiring someone should be a breeze," I retorted. Infuriated, Bob shouted at me to cut the crap. He had a bad habit of raising his voice, thinking that would intimidate others. But over the phone, I wasn't fazed and stood my ground. I decided to reveal everything his mother had been doing behind his back. From stealing money from me, blowing her pension on gambling, and even more shocking secrets. Surprisingly, even though Bob's mother claimed to be devastated by her husband's death, she's recently been spotted enjoying coffee with a younger man. Neighbors unanimously reported seeing her walking and chatting with this man at coffee shops, so there's no doubt about it. Furthermore, she's been handing him cash. The money she's stealing from my wallet wouldn't cover all of her expenses. Bob was also a target for her financial schemes. Stored in our bedroom closet were the pricey clothes and bags Bob had cherished for years. Knowing this, Bob's mother secretly stole them and sold them at a thrift shop. Foolishly enough, she had been selling them at the thrift shop right across from the deli where I worked, so I knew everything about it. Bob probably never opened that closet regularly, so he likely hadn't noticed. When I revealed this, Bob whispered in disbelief, "This can't be true." Suddenly, there was commotion on the other end of the call. From the sounds of it, he was checking the closet, accompanied by his mother's desperate attempts at explanation. After a pause, a disheartened Bob murmured, "It's really gone. All the brand name bags and clothes I bought when I was younger are missing." In response, his mother continued to feign innocence, even suggesting that a burglar might have been responsible. That's impossible. When we built our home, we prioritized security. We have a contract with a security company and have installed surveillance cameras. If an intruder broke in, a security officer would have been alerted. The evidence pointed only to an inside job. Do you see now? Your mother, using the death of your father as an excuse, really aimed for our money. The police can't intervene in these civil matters, so you're gonna have your hands full, huh? I pointed out. Hearing this, I could discern Bob's stifled sobs. He said he would contact again regarding the divorce. I emphasized I was set on divorcing him, but he hung up without responding. Days later, Bob, his mother, and I met at a local diner to discuss further. Bob had mentioned in a text that he was considering the divorce, and I had taken his word for it. Seeing them face to face, both appeared haggard, as though they had lost weight. The receipt from her purse confirmed she had sold Bob's belongings, and he had no choice but to accept the reality. His mother seemed much more subdued than before. She sat there, shrinking into her seat, avoiding eye contact. After a prolonged silence, Bob finally spoke. "I found out she's almost out of money. I'm thinking of getting her a place in a public housing project. Of course, I won't be helping her financially. That's fair, right?" I didn't agree. My only goal in attending the meeting was to discuss our divorce. Given the direction this conversation was heading, it felt like things were moving towards a reconciliation. I tried to change the course. "Do what you want regarding your mother. The only thing I want is a divorce. Nothing else." Seeing as I already regarded Bob as a stranger, I said this with a cold tone. The next moment, his head dropped so low it almost touched the table, and he began to plead. "I'm so sorry, Catherine. Please don't divorce me. I promise I'll never make you upset again. I'll repay all the money my mom took from you. Please, I beg you." Despite his feeble pleas, I couldn't feel any sympathy. Bob clearly had no intention of divorcing, and his mother just looked flustered and anxious. If pushing them wasn't working, I thought I might have to use another approach. I sighed and pulled out a photograph from my bag. The moment they saw it, both Bob and his mother's faces turned even paler. It was a picture of Bob walking hand in hand with a young woman. As it turns out, Bob had been having an affair with a coworker behind my back. And this wasn't something recent. It's been going on for over a year. When I first discovered Bob's affair, our son Charlie was still in college. I thought if I filed for divorce then, it might impact Charlie's future, so I kept silent. The other woman was in her late 20s and single, so as long as I kept quiet, it likely wouldn't escalate into a bigger issue. I assumed it was just a fling for Bob since he's much older. I thought that since Charlie would soon be independent, I could overlook the affair. Fortunately, Bob never touched our savings, and I felt dealing with a divorce over an affair now would be too much hassle. However, after the recent stress from my mother-in-law and how Bob treated me, I hit my breaking point. If he didn't agree to the divorce now, I was prepared to play this trump card. It was my last resort and I never thought I'd actually have to use it. For 25 years, I've shared my life with you and never thought of divorce. But seeing the situation now, can't you tell? I've reached my limit. Now that it's come to this, I'll hold you accountable for the affair too. Upon hearing this, Bob began to shake uncontrollably. As I had anticipated, he begged me not to divorce since it was just a fling. His mother also tried to intervene, saying it would shock Charlie. But it was futile. Because I had already told Charlie everything. Bob was stunned to realize that Charlie knew about the situation. At that moment, Charlie, who I had called earlier, joined us. Sitting beside me, he gave Bob and his mother a stern look. After a heavy sigh, he directed a disdainful gaze at Bob. "Dad, you've really disappointed me. When I heard about the affair, I was shocked, but what Grandma did was even worse." Hearing that, Bob's mother looked like she was on the verge of tears. Even if she didn't like me, hearing such words from her grandson, Charlie, must have been quite a shock. But Bob, in his pitiful state, became defensive. "Hey, this doesn't concern you. After all I've done for you, what's with that attitude? You're getting too big for your britches." In such a manner, using his position as a father, he started to scold Charlie. But Charlie, looking perplexed for a moment and then reflecting, replied, "Dad, you never really cared about family, right? Work was always your first love. Mom took care of everything at home, even paid for my high school and college. I always thought you were just someone who lived with us." Bob was left aghast, not expecting such words from his own son. His mother was equally shocked, especially learning that I was the one who financed Charlie's education. It was high time for Bob to realize his irresponsibility. The truth is, ever since he was young, Bob had a terrible habit of wasting money. Much like his mother, who spent lavishly on slot machines and outings with younger men. Like mother, like son, I guess. Even before we were married, I was concerned about this and had been saving for Charlie's education, sacrificing my own desires. While K-12 education is manageable, college in particular can be costly. The reason we didn't have more kids was partly because of this financial strain. Thankfully, Bob took care of the mortgage and utilities. But I managed all the other expenses, including groceries, entertainment, and Charlie's activities. Since Bob never pitched in. With my part-time job earnings and the $300,000 inheritance I received from my parents, I managed to adjust and never faced any economic hardships. I take pride in the fact that I never made Charlie sacrifice anything. At this point, Bob interrupted my narrative. "But I did make the payments, didn't I? Making it sound like I had no involvement is wrong." His mother chimed in agreement. It was clear that they were both self-centered, but I continued to state my case. To start with, I also contributed to our living expenses, and I was the one who managed the funds for Charlie's education. So, you have nothing to brag about. Also, you never gave Charlie even a single cent as a gift or allowance, right? Your husband discreetly gave me money, which I saved for Charlie. They were both left speechless. Charlie then added his voice to support me. "In the end, Dad, you only saw me as your heir and nothing else, right? Mom was the only one who supported me during my college years. And Grandma, sorry to say, but I hardly remember you." Hearing this, his grandmother was in tears, begging Charlie not to be so harsh. But Charlie was just telling the truth. My parents adored Charlie until their last breath, often spending time together. But he hardly had any interactions with his paternal grandparents, so it's no surprise he doesn't remember much. At least he acknowledged and appreciated the monetary gifts he received from his grandfather. This seemed to be the final blow, and the two were completely downcast. I turned to Bob and said, "Had enough? This is the reality. I want a divorce, and Charlie is on my side." I promptly stood up, paid for my coffee, and left the cafe. Charlie followed, giving a wry smile. Bob sat motionless, pale-faced, while his mother looked devastated. Afterward, I divorced Bob. His affair was exposed at his workplace, leading to his demotion and transfer. Although the woman played the victim at her company. However, her act didn't last long, and the truth of her initiating the affair surfaced, leading to her voluntary resignation. Post-divorce, Bob continued to live in that house with his mother. With no one to manage household chores, their home was in complete disarray. Furthermore, due to education fees, Bob's spending habits, and reckless home renovations, their savings were meager. Bob was devastated to learn this. Now unemployed and addicted to gambling, burdened with a house loan and an estranged family, Bob was living a tough life. Rumors were he was going to sell the house and move to an apartment soon. Karma, I thought, and couldn't help but chuckle. I rented an apartment near the house where Charlie and his fiancée lived as my new home. Charlie and his fiancée expressed their wish for me to move close by. She had lost her parents at a young age, so she felt she had no one to rely on. Learning from how my mother-in-law was, I decided to be a good mother-in-law, not too interfering but always there to lend a helping hand when needed. When grandchildren come along, life will surely become more lively. I was looking forward to such a peaceful second chapter in my life.